Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to start with a question most of us have never really stopped to ask. What actually happens to food at the molecular level when we reheat it? We do it every single day. Last night's dinner, this morning's leftovers, that takeout container calling your name from the fridge. It feels harmless, convenient even. But as someone who has spent decades studying the relationship between what we eat and how our bodies fight or fail to fight disease, I can tell you, not all foods are meant for a second trip through the microwave or the stove. Some foods, when reheated, undergo chemical transformations that go far beyond just changing taste or texture. They can produce compounds that stress our cells, disrupt our gut health, and in some cases contribute to processes that we spend our entire careers trying to prevent, including the kind of cellular damage linked to cancer risk. Today, I'm going to walk you through 4 foods, ones you probably have in your kitchen right now, that science tells us should never be reheated. I'll explain exactly why, what happens inside your body when you do, and what you can do instead to protect your health. This isn't about fear, it's about knowledge. Because the more we understand our food, the more power we have over our health. Let's get started. Let me start with something that surprises most people. Rice is not dangerous because of what happens when you heat it. Rice is dangerous because of what can happen before you ever turn on the stove. Here's what I mean. Raw rice, even in its dry, unopened bag sitting in your pantry, can carry spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. This isn't rare contamination, it's incredibly common, found in soil, in water, on the rice plants themselves. These spores are tough. They're built to survive. And when you cook rice, boiling it, steaming it, whatever method you use, you're not necessarily killing those spores, you're just putting them into a kind of dormant state, waiting. Now here's where the real danger begins, not in the reheating, but in what happens between the first cooking and the second. Once rice is cooked, if it sits out at room temperature, you've created what I call a 5-star hotel for bacteria. Warm, moist, starchy, it's the perfect environment. Those surviving Bacillus cereus spores wake up, they germinate, they multiply, and as they multiply, they release toxins directly into the rice itself. 2 toxins in particular, one that causes vomiting and one that causes diarrhea. Both are fast-acting and both are resilient. This is the critical piece of biology that most people don't understand, and it's why I want to be very precise about it. These toxins are heat stable. That means when you reheat that rice the next day, even if you microwave it until it's steaming hot, even if you fry it at high temperature, you are not destroying the toxin. You're simply serving it back to yourself, hot. So when people ask me, "Doctor, is it the reheating that's the problem?" I always correct the premise. The reheating is not creating the danger. The reheating is revealing a danger that was already created hours earlier when the rice sat out too long, cooling slowly, giving bacteria the exact window of opportunity they needed. Think about how often this happens in real life. You make a big batch of rice for dinner. You leave it on the counter while you eat, while you clean up, while you watch television. It sits there for 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes overnight. Then you scoop it into a container and put it in the fridge. By then, the damage may already be done. From a physiological standpoint, what happens next in your body is fast and unpleasant. Symptoms from Bacillus cereus toxins can appear within 30 minutes to 6 hours of eating contaminated rice. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramping, sometimes diarrhea. For most healthy adults, it resolves within 24 hours. But for young children, older adults, or anyone with a compromised immune system, it can be far more serious, even requiring hospitalization in rare cases. And here's the layer that connects to the deeper work I do, the work on angiogenesis and cellular health. Repeated exposure to bacterial toxins and the inflammatory response they trigger is not something your body simply shrugs off. Every time you subject your gut to this kind of insult, you're asking your immune system to mount a defense. Chronic repeated stress on the gut lining, chronic inflammation, these are the same pathways that, over years and decades, are implicated in far more serious disease processes, including the kind of cellular dysfunction we study in cancer prevention. So what's the fix? It's not complicated, but it does require intention. The moment rice finishes cooking, the clock starts. You want to cool it quickly, ideally within 1 hour, and get it into the refrigerator. Spread it out on a shallow tray if you're cooling a large batch, so heat dissipates faster rather than staying trapped in a dense, warm mound. Once refrigerated, cooked rice is generally safe for 3 to 4 days. And when you do reheat it thoroughly, but understand that thorough reheating protects you from live bacteria, not from toxins that may have already formed. If the rice sat out overnight on the counter, I want to be direct with you. The safest decision is to throw it away. I know that feels wasteful. I know it goes against everything we're taught about not wasting food, but there is no amount of reheating, no amount of stir-frying at high heat that will make that rice safe again if toxins have already formed. This is the kind of knowledge that doesn't require you to fear your kitchen. It requires you to understand it, to see the biology behind the behavior, and to make one small adjustment in timing that removes the risk almost entirely. Let's talk about chicken, because this one surprises people for a different reason. With rice, the danger is a toxin that survives heat. With chicken, the story is more subtle. It's about what repeated heating does to the proteins themselves and what that transformation means for your body over time. Chicken is one of the most protein-dense foods we eat regularly, and protein at the molecular level is a beautifully complex structure, long chains of amino acids folded into precise three-dimensional shapes. That shape is not decorative. It determines how your enzymes interact with it, how your gut breaks it down, how efficiently your body extracts the nutrients locked inside. When you cook chicken the first time, those proteins already begin to change shape. This is called denaturation, and it's a normal, expected part of cooking. It's why raw chicken looks translucent and cooked chicken looks opaque and firm. That's proteins unfolding and reorganizing under heat. This first transformation is fine. It's necessary. It's how we make chicken digestible and safe to eat in the first place. The concern begins when you reheat chicken a second time, particularly at high temperatures, particularly more than once. Each additional round of heating pushes those already altered proteins through further structural breakdown. And this is where the chemistry becomes relevant to long-term health, not just food safety in the traditional sense. When protein-rich foods are exposed to high heat repeatedly, they can form compounds called heterocyclic amines and advanced glycation end products. You'll sometimes see these abbreviated as HCAs and AGEs. These aren't exotic rare byproducts. They form routinely whenever meat is cooked at high temperature, and reheating compounds the exposure. Research has associated higher intake of these compounds with oxidative stress in the body, and oxidative stress is something I talk about constantly in my work because it's one of the fundamental mechanisms by which healthy cells accumulate damage over time. Here's why this matters beyond just one meal. Oxidative stress isn't something your body experiences once and clears out completely. It's cumulative. Every source of oxidative burden, whether from environmental toxins, from inflammation, from diet, adds to a total load your body has to manage. Your cells have remarkable repair mechanisms, but those mechanisms have limits. When you repeatedly introduce compounds that generate free radicals, you're asking your antioxidant defenses to work overtime, meal after meal, week after week. There's a second issue with reheated chicken that's more immediate and more common: uneven heating. Chicken is dense. Its thickness varies from one part of a piece to another. When you reheat it, especially in a microwave, you often get certain sections that reach a safe internal temperature while other sections remain lukewarm. Bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter, which may have been present even after initial cooking killed most of the population, can survive in those undercooked pockets. Reheating that appears complete on the surface can be deceptively incomplete at the core. This is different from the rice scenario, where the danger is a stable toxin already formed. With chicken, the risk compounds, pun intended, because you have two separate issues layered on top of each other: chemical transformation of the proteins from repeated heat, and the practical challenge of achieving uniform, safe reheating temperatures throughout a dense piece of meat. So what does the science actually recommend? If you're going to reheat chicken, do it once and do it thoroughly. using a food thermometer if possible to confirm it reaches 165 degrees Fahrenheit throughout, not just on the surface. Avoid reheating chicken multiple times across several days. If you're not going to finish it the first time you reheat it, portion it out in advance so each serving only goes through the heating cycle once. Cutting larger pieces into smaller, more uniform portions before storing also helps ensure even reheating later, reducing both the bacterial risk and the degree of protein breakdown from prolonged heat exposure. And if you're someone who cooks chicken in bulk for the week, consider this approach. Cook it once, portion it immediately while it's fresh, and freeze what you won't eat within 2 to 3 days, rather than repeatedly cycling it through the refrigerator and the reheating process. Now let's turn to potatoes. And this one tends to shock people the most because potatoes feel like the safest food in the world. Bland, starchy, comforting. But the danger here has nothing to do with the potato itself. It has everything to do with an invisible threat that thrives specifically because of how we store potatoes after cooking. The organism I want you to understand is Clostridium botulinum. This bacterium is different from anything we discussed with rice or chicken because it doesn't need oxygen to grow. In fact, oxygen is its enemy. It thrives specifically in anaerobic environments, meaning environments where air is excluded. And think about how we typically store leftover baked potatoes, wrapped tightly in aluminum foil, sitting on the counter or in the fridge. That foil wrapping, which feels like responsible food storage, actually creates exactly the low oxygen environment this bacterium needs to flourish. Here's the biology in more depth, because I think it matters. Potatoes grow in soil, and soil is one of the natural reservoirs for Clostridium botulinum spores. Washing and peeling reduces the spore load, but doesn't eliminate it entirely. When you bake a potato, the heat destroys the active bacteria on the surface, but spores, like the spores we discussed with rice, are far more heat resistant. They can survive standard cooking temperatures. Then, if that baked potato is wrapped in foil and left at room temperature, or even refrigerated for an extended period without proper temperature control, those spores can germinate in the internal, oxygen-free environment created by the wrapping. As the bacteria multiply, they produce botulinum toxin. And I want to be very clear about what this toxin actually does because it's not comparable to the stomach upset we discussed with rice or chicken. Botulinum toxin is a neurotoxin. It's one of the most potent toxins known to science. It works by blocking nerve signals to your muscles, and in significant exposure, it causes a condition called botulism, which can produce symptoms ranging from blurred vision and difficulty swallowing to muscle weakness, and in severe, untreated cases, respiratory failure. This is a medical emergency, not a stomach bug you wait out at home. And critically, just like with the rice toxins, botulinum toxin is not something you can reliably neutralize by reheating in a microwave or a low oven. While the toxin itself can actually be destroyed by sustained high heat, in practice, home reheating is often uneven and insufficient to guarantee full inactivation, especially in the dense center of a potato. You are relying on imprecise kitchen conditions to undo a problem that developed because of imprecise storage conditions in the first place. That's not a bet I want anyone in this room making with a neurotoxin. What makes this particularly insidious is that botulinum toxin doesn't necessarily change the taste, smell, or appearance of the potato. Unlike spoiled food that warns you with an off odor or a strange texture, a potato harboring this toxin can look and smell completely normal. Your senses, which usually serve as a first line of defense against unsafe food, offer no reliable protection here. This is why the guidance from food safety experts is so specific and so important to follow precisely. Baked potatoes should never be left wrapped in foil at room temperature for more than 2 hours. If you're not eating the potato immediately after baking, remove the foil before refrigerating. This allows oxygen back into the environment and interrupts the exact conditions Clostridium botulinum needs to grow. Store it in the refrigerator, unwrapped or loosely covered, and consume it within 3 to 4 days. The same principle extends to other foods commonly stored this way. Garlic and oil, for instance, follows an identical mechanism, and I'd encourage the same caution there. I share this not to alarm you, but because I think this is one of the clearest examples in all of food science of how a well-intentioned habit, wrapping food tightly to keep it fresh, can inadvertently create the precise biological conditions for one of the most dangerous toxins we know. Understanding the mechanism is what allows you to change the behavior permanently without ever having to think twice about it again. Let's move to the last one, spinach. And really, this applies to the whole family of nitrate-rich leafy greens. Beets, celery, and lettuce fall into this same category. This is the most chemically nuanced of the four because unlike the previous examples, we're not talking about bacteria or toxins that form from bacterial growth. We're talking about a natural compound in the vegetable itself that transforms into something different when exposed to repeated heat. Spinach, like many leafy greens, is naturally rich in nitrates. And I want to start by saying nitrates themselves are not inherently dangerous. In fact, dietary nitrates from vegetables have been studied extensively for their cardiovascular benefits. They can convert into nitric oxide in the body, which helps relax blood vessels and improve blood flow. This is actually one of the reasons leafy greens are considered so beneficial as part of a regular diet. So the plant compound itself isn't the villain in this story. The problem emerges through a specific chemical pathway that heat and time set into motion. When spinach is cooked and then left to sit, especially at room temperature, and especially if reheated, the nitrates naturally present in the vegetable can convert into nitrites. This conversion is accelerated by heat, by prolonged storage, and particularly by repeated heating cycles. This is a well-documented transformation, not a rare or unusual chemical event. Nitrites themselves aren't necessarily the end of the story either. The real concern arises from what nitrites can become next. Under certain conditions, particularly when nitrites interact with amino acids or with proteins, which spinach and many foods contain in some quantity, they can form compounds called nitrosamines. And nitrosamines are a category of compounds that have been studied for decades in cancer research. Many nitrosamine compounds are classified as probable or possible carcinogens based on both laboratory studies and epidemiological research linking high nitrosamine exposure to increased cancer risk, particularly gastrointestinal cancers. This is precisely the kind of mechanism I spend my career focused on, not single dramatic exposures, but repeated, low-level chemical insults that over years shift the internal environment of the body in a direction that favors disease rather than health. One reheated portion of spinach isn't going to determine anyone's cancer risk, but the pattern matters. Habits compound. And in medicine, we've learned again and again that it's the repeated exposures, not the isolated ones, that shape long-term outcomes. There's an additional layer of complexity here worth understanding. Infants and young children are particularly vulnerable to nitrite exposure specifically because nitrites can interfere with how their blood carries oxygen, a condition called methemoglobinemia. This is actually why pediatric nutrition guidelines are especially cautious about certain nitrate-rich vegetables, including spinach, for babies under 6 months, and why reheating and improper storage compound a risk that's already elevated in that population. I also want to address something people often ask me. Does this mean I should stop eating spinach? Absolutely not. Fresh spinach, properly cooked and eaten promptly, remains one of the most nutrient-dense foods available, rich in folate, vitamin K, iron, and antioxidant compounds that support the very cellular defense systems we've been discussing throughout this talk. The goal here is not avoidance. It's precision in how we store and reheat it. The practical guidance is straightforward once you understand the chemistry behind it. Cook only the amount of spinach you plan to eat in that sitting whenever possible. If you do have leftovers, refrigerate them promptly within 2 hours of cooking rather than letting them sit out. And ideally, consume leftover cooked spinach within a day, minimizing how long it sits before that first and only reheat. Repeated reheating, where spinach is warmed, cooled, and warmed again across multiple days, is where the nitrate to nitrite to nitrosamine pathway has the most opportunity to progress. This is the case where a food that is genuinely, measurably good for you can become a source of unnecessary risk purely through a storage habit, not through anything inherent to the vegetable itself. And once you see the chemistry laid out this clearly, the adjustment required is almost effortless. Eat it fresh, store it quickly, reheat it once. Let me leave you with this thought. What we've walked through today, rice, chicken, potatoes, spinach, these aren't obscure foods. They're the foods most of us eat every single week, sometimes every single day. And that's exactly why this matters so much. This isn't about rare exposures to exotic dangers. It's about the ordinary, everyday decisions happening in kitchens all over the world. Decisions made without a second thought that quietly shape our long-term health. I want to bring you back to the thread that connects everything I've shared. In each case, the toxin in rice, the protein breakdown in chicken, the neurotoxin risk in potatoes, the nitrosamine formation in spinach, the danger wasn't really about reheating itself. It was about what happened in the hours and days before the reheating. It was about storage, about timing, about understanding what's actually happening at the molecular level inside food that looks to our eyes completely unchanged. This is the heart of what I've dedicated my career to. The idea that food is not just fuel and it's not just flavor. Food is information. It's instruction. Every meal you eat sends signals to your cells, your immune system, your blood vessels, signals that either support your body's natural defenses or quietly undermine them. And the beautiful part of this science is that once you understand the mechanism, you gain real power, not fear, power. The power to make one small adjustment consistently that removes risk almost entirely. You don't need to overhaul your entire diet. You don't need to fear your refrigerator or your microwave. You simply need to understand the biology and let that understanding guide small, sustainable habits. I hope today gave you exactly that kind of clarity. If this information was valuable to you, I'd encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation, because there is so much more of the science I want to share with you. And please, leave a comment below. Tell me which of these 4 surprised you the most, or share a question you'd like me to explore in a future talk. I read every single one, and your questions often shape exactly what we cover next. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.